Mara Whitlock had 30 seconds to decide. Pull the trigger on the scar-faced man standing in her porch light, or listen to his impossible offer. Behind him, two black SUVs idled at her gate, engines purring like predators. Her parents were 6 months dead. Her farm was drowning in debt. And this stranger in a $10,000 suit had just said the 4 words that would either save her life or end it. I need a wife. Tomorrow. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a like and comment with your city below. I want to see how far Mara's story travels. Now settle in, because what happens next will change everything. The October wind cut across the Virginia fields like a blade, carrying the scent of turned earth and dying leaves. Mara Whitlock stood on the sagging porch of the farmhouse where 3 generations of her family had lived and died, her father's hunting rifle heavy in her hands, and watched 2 black SUVs crawl up the dirt road like something out of a nightmare. It was just past 9 on a Thursday night. She had been inside tallying numbers that refused to add up. $150,000 in debt, 3 months behind on every payment, and Carl Finch's latest message still blinking on her phone. Time's up, sweetheart. Friday morning, we come collect. Carl Finch. The name tasted like poison. He was the loan shark who had appeared at her parents' funeral with a briefcase full of documents she had been too grief-stricken to read carefully, offering to consolidate their debts at what he called a family rate. She had been 26 years old, alone, and drowning. She had signed. That was 6 months ago. Now the SUVs rolled to a stop at her gate, headlights cutting through the dark, and Mara's hands tightened on the rifle. She had grown up with guns. Her father had taught her to shoot before she could ride a bike. She knew how to stand her ground. The driver's door of the first SUV opened. A man stepped out, and even from 40 yards away, Mara could tell he was different from Carl's usual thugs. He moved with a kind of coiled grace, his expensive suit fitting him like a second skin. When he stepped into the porch light, she saw the scar, a thick, brutal line that ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pulling one corner of his mouth into a permanent half-smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "That's far enough," Mara called out, raising the rifle to her shoulder. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "This is private property." The man stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Up close, she could see more details. Dark hair touched with silver at the temples, eyes the color of winter steel, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone in violence. He was somewhere in his late 30s, maybe 40, and he regarded her rifle the way someone might regard a child's toy. "Miss Whitlock," he said, and his voice was low, cultured, completely at odds with the scar and the SUVs and the 5 other men she could see emerging from the vehicles behind him. "My name is Damian Cross. I'm not here to hurt you." "Then you're in the wrong place," Mara said, "because everyone who shows up here after dark is here to hurt me." Something flickered across his face, recognition, maybe, or respect. "I know about Carl Finch," he said. "I know about your debt. I know he's planning to take this farm tomorrow morning, and I know you have no way to stop him." Mara's finger moved to the trigger. "Get off my property. I'm here to offer you a way out." I need a wife," Damian Cross said, and the words hit her like a physical blow. "By tomorrow morning. Legal, binding, and real enough to satisfy a council of lawyers and crime lords. In exchange, I will erase your debt, give you protection, and make sure Carl Finch never comes near you again." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the bare trees. Mara stared at him. "You're insane." "I'm desperate," he corrected. "There's a difference. I don't even know you. You can't just—" "My father died 8 weeks ago," Damian said, and there was something flat and final in his voice. "He left a will with one condition. I have 30 days to marry, or everything he built, every business, every asset, every territory, goes to my half-brother Julian. I have 2 days left. And if Julian inherits, the first thing he'll do is destroy anyone who might challenge him. That includes you." Mara lowered the rifle an inch. "Why would your brother care about me?" Damian's expression went cold. "Because Julian is the one who owns Carl Finch. The loan shark terrorizing you. He's Julian's creature. Your debt, your suffering, it's all a pressure point designed to make sure I fail. Julian wants you broken and desperate because desperate people make mistakes. And when I showed up here tonight instead of at some society wedding, he knew I was out of options." The rifle felt suddenly heavy in her hands. This is insane, she said again, but her voice had lost its edge. It's survival, Damien said, for both of us. I need a wife to claim my inheritance. You need someone to stand between you and Carl Finch. We can help each other. I don't need help from a... She stopped herself. From a crime lord? Damien finished, and that not-quite smile pulled at his scarred mouth. You can say it. It's true. My father built an empire on blood and fear, and when he died, he left me in charge. But that empire comes with rules, and one of those rules is very simple. Marry within 30 days or lose everything. I don't have time to court anyone. I don't have time to convince anyone. I have 2 days and I need someone who understands what it means to have nothing left to lose. Mara's throat felt tight. You don't know anything about me. I know you've been running this farm alone since your parents died in a car accident last April, Damien said quietly. I know you sold the equipment, the livestock, everything you could to keep up with payments. I know you haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in months. I know Carl Finch holds paper on this land that your family has owned for 70 years, and tomorrow morning he's going to take it all unless someone stops him. Am I wrong? She wanted to tell him yes. She wanted to tell him to get back in his SUV and disappear into whatever dark hole he had crawled out of. But the numbers on her kitchen table didn't lie, and neither did the exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders like a physical weight. What would this marriage actually mean? She asked. 1 year, Damien said immediately. A legal contract, witnessed and binding. You keep the farm. I pay off every debt. You get protection, real protection, not just from Carl Finch, but from anyone who might see you as a target. In exchange, you appear at my side when necessary, play the role of my wife convincingly enough to satisfy the council, and help me secure my inheritance. And after the year? Divorce, if you want it. Or we renegotiate. But you walk away with a clean slate either way. No debt, no threats, no strings. You'll have your life back. Mara looked past him at the SUVs, at the men waiting in the shadows. What's the catch? The catch, Damien said, and for the first time she heard something like honesty in his voice, is that my world is dangerous. Julian won't accept this quietly. There will be threats, possibly violence. You'll be stepping into a life most people spend their whole existence trying to avoid. I'm already living that life, Mara said bitterly. Every time Carl Finch calls, every time I hear a car on this road, I wonder if today's the day they come to take everything. At least your way, I'd have a fighting chance. Damien studied her for a long moment. You're braver than I expected. I'm not brave. I'm out of options. She lowered the rifle completely, letting it rest against her hip. If I say yes, and I'm not saying I am, I have conditions. Name them. You live here, Mara said, on this farm, not in some penthouse or mansion or wherever you come from. If we're going to sell this as real, you live in my world, not the other way around. Damien's eyebrows rose a fraction. That's your condition? Part of it. The other part is this: no touching without my consent. No claiming rights you haven't earned. This is a business arrangement, not anything else. You want a wife on paper, you get a wife on paper. Nothing more. For a moment she thought he would refuse. Then he nodded slowly. Agreed. Anything else? Yeah, Mara said. If this goes wrong, if your brother or anyone else comes after me because of this deal, you don't get to sacrifice me to save yourself. I'm not a pawn. I'm a partner, or this doesn't happen. Damien's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. Partners, he repeated. All right, Miss Whitlock. Partners. He extended his hand. Mara looked at it for a long moment, scarred knuckles, steady fingers, the hand of a man who had built and destroyed in equal measure. Then she shifted the rifle to her left hand and reached out. His grip was warm, firm, and utterly certain. We'll need to move quickly, Damien said. My lawyers are already drawing up the papers. We sign tonight, marry tomorrow morning before the deadline. Can you be ready? Ready for what? A wedding? A performance, Damien corrected. Julian will challenge the marriage. The council will want proof it's legitimate. We need to be convincing from the very first moment. Mara felt a hysterical laugh building in her chest. I'm a farmer, not an actress. You don't need to act, Damien said quietly. You just need to stand beside me and refuse to break. Can you do that? She thought about her parents, buried on the hill behind the house. She thought about 70 years of Whitlock history turning to dust under a bank's gavel. She thought about Carl Finch's last message. We come collect. Yes, Mara said. I can do that. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of signatures and strangers. Damien's lawyers descended on her kitchen table like well-dressed locusts, spreading contracts across the scarred wood surface and explaining terms in rapid-fire legalese that made Mara's head spin. She read every word anyway, her father's voice echoing in her memory. Never sign anything you don't understand. The contract was surprisingly straightforward. 1 year of marriage, all debts satisfied within 72 hours. A monthly stipend for household expenses that was more than she used to make in 6 months of farming. And a prenuptial agreement that spelled out exactly what would happen if things ended badly. She kept the farm free and clear and walked away with enough money to rebuild her life. This is too generous, Mara said, looking up at Damien, who stood by her kitchen window watching the dark fields. It's fair, he said without turning. You're taking on considerable risk. You should be compensated accordingly. Your brother, one of the lawyers said, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Chen, will argue that this marriage is a sham, a business transaction designed solely to circumvent your father's will. We need to be prepared for that challenge. How do we prepare for it? Mara asked. Victoria's smile was thin and precise. By making it real enough that no court in Virginia will question it. You'll marry tomorrow at the county clerk's office, but you'll need witnesses, documentation, and evidence of cohabitation. Mr. Cross will move into this residence immediately. Mara blinked. Tonight? The marriage can be challenged if there's any gap between the ceremony and cohabitation, Victoria explained. The moment you're married, you need to be living as a married couple. That means shared residence, shared meals, shared routines. The more authentic it appears, the harder it will be for Julian to overturn. I have one bedroom, Mara said faintly. I'll take the couch, Damien said, finally turning from the window. We agreed. Your rules, your world. I meant it. She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was catching up with her, and the signatures were blurring together on the page. She signed the last document at 2 a.m, her hand cramping around the pen. It's done, Victoria said, gathering the papers with brisk efficiency. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, county clerk's office. We'll have witnesses and a photographer to document the ceremony. Dress nicely, but not too nicely. We want believable, not theatrical. After the lawyers left, the house felt too quiet and too full at the same time. Damien's men had brought in luggage, just 2 bags, which surprised her, and now they were gone, leaving just the 2 of them in the kitchen under the harsh fluorescent light. You should sleep, Damien said. Tomorrow will be long. I don't think I can sleep, Mara admitted. She felt wired, like she had drunk too much coffee, every nerve ending singing with adrenaline and fear. Then have a drink with me. She almost refused. Then she saw the bottle of whiskey he had pulled from his bag, expensive, older than she was, and thought, why not? I'm already marrying a stranger. Might as well have a drink with him first. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had signed the contracts, and Damien poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into mismatched glasses. To survival, he said, raising his glass. To survival, Mara echoed, and drank. The whiskey burned going down, smooth and fierce at the same time, and she felt some of the tension uncoil from her shoulders. Tell me about them, Damien said. Your parents. Mara looked at him sharply. Why? Because in about 7 hours, I'm going to be your husband, and I should know something about the people who built this place. She wanted to tell him it was none of his business. Instead, she heard herself say, They met in high school. My mom was from the city, visiting her aunt for the summer. My dad was the farmer's son who taught her how to drive a tractor. She smiled despite herself. They got married the day after graduation, and they worked this land together for 30 years. They were good people. They deserved better than what they got. The accident, Damien said quietly. What happened? Black ice, Mara said. February, they were coming back from the feed store. The truck went off the road into a ravine. She took another drink. They died before the ambulance got there. The medical bills, the funeral costs, the back taxes they'd been juggling, it all came due at once. That's when Carl Finch showed up. Damien's expression went cold. He targeted you. He saw an opportunity, Mara corrected. Young woman, alone, desperate. He made it sound like he was helping. And Julian used him to get to me, Damien said, which means this is my fault. Don't, Mara said sharply. Don't take on my problems like they belong to you. We're doing this because it benefits both of us. That's all. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough. But for what it's worth, I am sorry. About your parents. About Carl Finch. About all of it. Apologies don't change anything. No, Damien agreed, but action does. And tomorrow, we act. Mara did sleep, eventually, curled up in her childhood bedroom, while Damien stretched out on the living room couch. She woke at dawn to the smell of coffee and found him already dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, looking utterly out of place in her shabby kitchen. There's not much for breakfast, she said. I've got eggs and... I'm not hungry, Damien said. But thank you. They drove to the county clerk's office in separate vehicles. Damien in one of the SUVs with his security detail, Mara in her battered pickup truck that coughed black smoke and threatened to stall at every red light. She had put on the only dress she owned, a simple navy sheath her mother had bought her for church, and felt wildly underdressed when she saw Victoria Chen waiting on the courthouse steps in an immaculate gray suit. Perfect, Victoria said, looking Mara up and down. You look exactly right. Real, relatable, not trying too hard. Julian won't be able to claim you're some paid actress. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, read the words from a card with the enthusiasm of someone reciting a grocery list. Damien's answers were clear and firm. Mara's voice shook on, I do, but she got the words out. When the clerk said, You may kiss the bride, Damien looked at Mara with a question in his eyes. She nodded once, barely perceptible. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. Brief, chaste, and utterly impersonal. It was over in a heartbeat, but the photographer's camera flashed, capturing the moment forever. Congratulations, the clerk said, utterly bored. You're married. They walked out into the October sunshine as Mr. and Mrs. Cross, and Mara felt like she had stepped into someone else's life. Now what? She asked. Now we go home, Damien said, and we wait for Julian to make his move. Julian Cross made his move 3 hours later. Mara was in the barn trying to convince herself this was all real when the black SUV rolled up the driveway. For a moment she thought it was Damien returning from whatever mysterious errand had taken him into town, but then she saw the license plate was different, and the driver who emerged was younger, sharper, and wearing a smile that made her skin crawl. Well, well, he said, sauntering toward her like he owned the place. The famous Mrs. Cross. I have to say, I expected someone a little more polished. Mara set down the shovel she had been holding. You must be Julian. Guilty, he said, spreading his hands. I wanted to meet my new sister-in-law, see what kind of woman would marry my brother on 24 hours' notice. The kind who doesn't like uninvited guests, Mara said evenly. You should go. Julian laughed, and it was a cold, brittle sound. Oh, I don't think so. See, this whole thing, the rushed wedding, the contract marriage, the farm girl bride, it's all very touching, but it's also very transparent. You're a fraud, sweetheart, and I'm going to prove it. I have a marriage license that says otherwise. Paper, Julian said dismissively. Paper can be challenged, especially when the marriage is obviously a sham designed to cheat me out of what's rightfully mine. Your father's will. My father, Julian interrupted, his voice going sharp, was a sentimental old fool who thought Damien walked on water. But Damien's not the saint everyone thinks he is, and this marriage proves it. He bought you, just like he buys everything else. Mara felt her temper flare. Nobody bought me. Really? Then why did you say yes? Love at first sight? Julian's eyes glittered. Or was it the money? The protection? The chance to save this pathetic little farm from the wolves? It's none of your business why It's absolutely my business, Julian said, stepping closer. Because in 3 days, I'm going to stand in front of the council of 5 families and tell them exactly what this marriage is. A desperate attempt by a desperate man to hold on to power he doesn't deserve. And when they void it, and they will, you're going to lose everything. The farm, the protection, the money, all of it. And Carl Finch will be waiting. Mara's blood ran cold. You can't. I can, Julian said softly. I already did. Carl's not just my associate, sweetheart. He's my insurance policy. The moment this marriage falls apart, he comes to collect. And I promise you, what he collects won't just be money. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. When you see my brother, tell him I said congratulations. He always did have a thing for lost causes. Julian drove away in a cloud of dust, leaving Mara standing alone in the barn with her heart hammering against her ribs. When Damien returned 20 minutes later, she was still standing there. What happened? He asked immediately, reading something in her face. Your brother paid me a visit, Mara said, and her voice came out flat and hard. He says he's going to challenge the marriage in front of some council. He says they'll void it, and when they do, Carl Finch comes back. Is that true? Damien's expression went dark. The council meets in 3 days. It's tradition. Whenever there's a significant change in leadership, the heads of the 5 families gather to acknowledge it. Julian will use that meeting to argue the marriage is fraudulent. Can he win? If we give him ammunition, yes. Damien stepped closer. The council respects strength, loyalty, and tradition. If they think I married you purely as a business transaction, they'll side with Julian. But if they believe the marriage is real or real enough, they'll uphold it. How do we convince them of that in 3 days? We don't, Damien said quietly. You do. Mara stared at him. What? The council will expect me to defend the marriage, Damien explained. But my word won't matter. Julian's already poisoned that well. What they won't expect is for you to defend it, to stand up in a room full of crime lords and tell them why you chose this. If you can do that, if you can make them believe you're here because you want to be, not because you were bought or coerced, that's our only shot. You want me to lie to a room full of criminals. I want you to tell them the truth, Damien said. That you made a choice and you're standing by it. That's all they need to hear. Mara turned away, looking out at the fields her family had worked for 3 generations. And if I can't convince them, then Julian wins. The marriage is voided, the inheritance goes to him, and you're back where you started. He paused. Except Carl Finch will know you tried to cross him. And men like Carl don't forget. She closed her eyes. This is insane. This is survival, Damien said, echoing his words from the night before. And you're stronger than you think. Mara opened her eyes and looked at him. This stranger she had married, this man with violence in his past and scars on his face, who was asking her to walk into a den of wolves and convince them she belonged there. 3 days, she said. 3 days, Damien confirmed. Then we'd better make this look convincing. For the next 72 hours, Mara Whitlock learned what it meant to live with a man who existed in 2 worlds at once. Damien moved through her farmhouse like a ghost, occupying space without disturbing it. He rose before dawn, made coffee in silence, and spent his mornings on phone calls conducted in low tones from the porch. She would catch glimpses of that other life, the one built on power and fear, in the way his voice turned cold when he gave orders, in the way his hand would drift toward the gun she now knew he kept beneath his jacket. But then he would hang up, turn to her, and ask if she needed help with the feed buckets, and the crime lord would disappear behind the man who was trying, however imperfectly, to keep his promise. He slept on the couch, true to his word. Every morning Mara would find the blanket folded precisely, the pillow stacked on top, as if he were trying to minimize his presence in her home. It should have reassured her. Instead, it made her feel guilty in a way she couldn't quite name. On the second day, he fixed the broken hinge on the barn door without being asked. She found him there in the afternoon, his expensive shirt discarded, his shoulders straining against a white undershirt as he wrestled the old wood back into alignment. The scar on his face caught the light, and she realized for the first time that it wasn't the only one. His forearms were marked with smaller scars. A roadmap of violence survived. "You don't have to do that," she said from the doorway. He looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It needed fixing. I was going to get to it eventually. Now you don't have to." He tested the hinge, and the door swung smoothly for the first time in months. "Besides, if we're selling this as real, I should probably look like I live here. Callus's help." Mara leaned against the doorframe. "You're very calculating about this." "I'm being practical," Damien corrected. "The council meets tomorrow night. Every detail matters." "Tell me about them," she said. "The council. What am I walking into? He set down his tools and reached for his shirt. 5 families, 5 votes. The Castellanos control the ports, shipping, imports, everything that comes through the water. Marcus Castellano is old school, traditional. He'll respect the marriage if he believes it honors my father's wishes. And if he doesn't believe it, then we lose his vote. Damien shrugged into his shirt, leaving it unbuttoned. The Kuryakins run protection and enforcement. Victor Kuryakin is pragmatic above all else. He'll vote based on what serves his interests, which means he'll want to know what I can offer him that Julian can't. You make it sound like a business negotiation. It is, Damien said bluntly. The council exists to maintain balance. They don't care about sentiment or legacy. They care about stability and profit. If I can prove I'm the better bet, they'll back me. If Julian convinces them otherwise, they'll throw me to the wolves without a second thought. Mara felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm afternoon. Who are the others? Diane Foster runs the financial operations. Money laundering, investments, offshore accounts. She's brilliant and utterly ruthless. She was my father's closest advisor, which means she'll be watching me carefully to see if I measure up. Then there's James Chen, who controls the gambling and entertainment sector. He's younger, ambitious, always looking for an angle. And finally, Elizabeth Moretti. She inherited her family's territory 2 years ago when her husband died under suspicious circumstances. She's smart, dangerous, and she hates Julian almost as much as I do. Because Julian tried to move in on her territory the moment her husband was buried, Damien said, and there was something dark in his voice. He assumed she would be weak, that a woman couldn't hold what her husband built. She proved him wrong in ways that involved several of his men disappearing and were never found. She'll vote against Julian on principle, but I still need to convince her I'm worth supporting. Mara absorbed this, trying to imagine standing in a room with these people, criminals, all of them, who measured loyalty in blood and settled disputes with bullets. What do I say to them? The truth, Damien said, that you chose this. That you're here because it was the best option in a bad situation, but you made the choice freely. They'll respect that more than any love story we could fabricate. And if they ask why you chose me, some nobody from a failing farm? He was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. I'll tell them I chose you because you're the only person I've met in the last 8 weeks who wasn't trying to use my father's death to advance their own position. You needed help, and I needed honesty. That's more valuable than any alliance I could have bought. Something in Mara's chest tightened. You're a better liar than I thought. I'm not lying, Damien said quietly. I've spent the last 2 months drowning in people who want something from me. Power, money, access, revenge. You're the first person who looked at what I was offering and set conditions instead of just grabbing everything you could get. That matters. Before Mara could respond, one of Damien's security team appeared at the barn entrance. Sir, we have a problem. Damien's expression shifted instantly, the vulnerability closing off behind a mask of cold control. What kind of problem? Carl Finch is at the property line. He's demanding to speak with Miss Whitlock. He has 4 men with him, and they are armed. Mara's blood turned to ice. He can't be here. You said... I said I would handle it, Damien said, his voice hard. And I will. Stay here. Like hell, Mara snapped, pushing past him. This is my farm, and I'm not hiding while you fight my battles. She saw the muscle in his jaw tighten, but he didn't argue. Instead, he fell into step beside her, and she felt the shift in his demeanor, the way his hand moved toward his gun, the way his eyes scanned the fields ahead. This was the man who ran an empire built on violence, and for the first time she was grateful for it. They found Carl Finch leaning against the gate, his expensive leather jacket at odds with the rural setting. He was a big man, soft around the middle, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. Behind him, 4 men lounged against a black sedan, trying to look casual and failing. Well, well, Carl said, straightening when he saw them approach. Mrs. Cross, I presume? Congratulations are in order, I hear. Get off my property, Mara said, her voice flat. Now, is that any way to greet an old friend? Carl's smile widened. We had an arrangement, sweetheart. Money owed, favors exchanged. You can't just marry some mobster and think that erases our history. Our history, Mara said through gritted teeth, is over. My debts are paid. Funny thing about that, Carl said, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. I don't recall receiving payment. In fact, according to my records, You still owe me $150,000 plus interest. That's a lot of money to just forget about. Damien stepped forward, and Mara saw Carl's men tense. The debt was purchased, Damien said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. 48 hours ago, my lawyers bought out every note you hold on this property. You were paid in full, with a 20% premium for your trouble. Check your accounts, Mr. Finch. The money's already there. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Carl's face. Julian, Damien interrupted, doesn't speak for me. And if he told you to come here and intimidate my wife, then he's using you as a pawn in a game you don't understand. Walk away, Carl. Take your men and go, and we'll forget this conversation ever happened. Carl's face flushed red. You think you can just throw money around and make problems disappear? This isn't over, Cross. Julian is going to lose, Damien said, and there was ice in his voice. Tomorrow night, the council will confirm my position, and when they do, you'll be on the wrong side of a very dangerous line. So I'm going to give you one chance to step back across it before you can anymore. Take the money. Walk away. And pray I'm feeling generous enough not to remember this conversation when it's over. The two men stared at each other, and Mara felt the air between them crackling with potential violence. Carl's hand twitched toward his jacket, and instantly Damien's security team materialized from the shadows. 4 men with guns already drawn, flanking the gate with the kind of professional precision that said they had done this 1,000 times before. Carl went pale. You're making a mistake. No, Damien said softly. You are. Last chance, Carl. Take it. For a long, terrible moment, Mara thought Carl would refuse. Then he jerked his head toward his men, and they retreated to the sedan with the awkward haste of people who had just realized how badly they were outmatched. This isn't over, Carl said, climbing into the driver's seat. Julian's going to bury you both. He's welcome to try, Damien said. They watched the sedan disappear down the dirt road, and only when it was completely out of sight did Damien's men lower their weapons and fade back into the perimeter. Mara discovered she was shaking. You bought my debt. I told you I would. You didn't tell me it was 48 hours ago, before we were even married. Damien turned to look at her. Would it have changed your answer? I don't know, Mara said honestly. Maybe. Probably. She wrapped her arms around herself. You paid him before you knew I would say yes. What if I had refused? Then you would have woken up the next morning debt-free. And wondering who your anonymous benefactor was, Damien said simply. Carl Finch is a cancer. I was going to cut him out either way. Why? Because Julian uses him to hurt people who can't fight back, Damien said, and there was steel beneath the words. And because I meant what I said, I don't let people hurt what's mine. The moment you agreed to this marriage, you became my responsibility. That means Carl Finch doesn't get to touch you, threaten you, or come within a mile of this farm ever again. Mara stared at him, this complicated, dangerous man who had walked into her life 3 days ago and turned everything upside down. I don't understand you. You don't have to understand me, Damien said. You just have to trust me enough to stand beside me tomorrow night. Can you do that? She thought about Carl Finch's face when he realized Damien had outmaneuvered him. She thought about the way Damien's men had appeared like shadows, silent and lethal. She thought about the barn door that now swung smoothly on its hinges, and the coffee waiting for her every morning, and the careful way this violent man had folded his blanket so as not to intrude on her space. Yes, Mara said. I can do that. Damien nodded once, then turned back toward the house. Good, because tomorrow night we're going to need every ounce of that trust. That evening, Victoria Chen arrived with a garment bag and an expression that brooked no argument. The council meets at 8 tomorrow, she said, sweeping into the farmhouse like she owned it. Which means we have less than 24 hours to make you look like someone who belongs at Damien Cross's side. Mara looked down at her jeans and worn flannel shirt. What's wrong with what I have? Nothing, if you're trying to convince them you're a charity case he took pity on, Victoria said crisply. But if you want them to believe you chose this marriage freely, you need to look like a woman who knows her own worth. Come on, we're going shopping. I don't need... This isn't optional, Victoria interrupted. Damien hired me to make sure this marriage holds up under scrutiny, and that includes making sure you look the part. Now get in the car before I have to explain to him why his wife showed up to the most important meeting of his life looking like she just mucked out a barn. Despite herself, Mara laughed. You're terrifying. Thank you, Victoria said seriously. It's part of my charm. They drove to Richmond, to a boutique Mara couldn't have afforded in a million years. Victoria moved through the racks with ruthless efficiency, pulling dresses and jackets and shoes that Mara was certain would cost more than her monthly stipend. I can't afford any of this, Mara protested. You're not paying, Victoria said. Damien is. Consider it part of the performance budget. I don't want him to think. Damien doesn't think anything except that he needs you to walk into that room looking like you belong there, Victoria said firmly. Try this one. The dress was dark emerald green, simple and elegant, with clean lines that skimmed her figure without clinging. When Mara looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Strong, composed, and utterly unlike the exhausted farmer who had been drowning in debt a week ago. Perfect, Victoria said with satisfaction. That's the one. Now shoes, heels, nothing too high. You need to be able to stand your ground without wobbling. And we'll do your hair simple, professional. You're not trying to seduce anyone. You're trying to project confidence and clarity. Understand? Mara nodded, feeling slightly overwhelmed. Good. Victoria's expression softened fractionally. I know this is a lot, but Damien's counting on you tomorrow, and despite what you might think, he doesn't trust easily. The fact that he brought you into this situation means he believes you can handle it. Don't prove him wrong. By the time they returned to the farm, it was well past dark. Damien was waiting on the porch, and when Mara stepped out of Victoria's car carrying the garment bag, something shifted in his expression. It went well? He asked. Your lawyer is a force of nature, Mara said. That's why I hired her. He stood, and in the porch light she could see the tension in his shoulders. Can I talk to you? Alone? Victoria took the hint, disappearing into the house with a knowing smile. Mara set down the garment bag and joined Damien at the porch railing, looking out at the dark fields. Tomorrow's going to be difficult, Damien said after a moment. Julian will say things designed to hurt you, to make you doubt yourself. He'll try to paint you as naive, desperate, or bought. You need to be ready for that. I am ready. Are you? He turned to face her fully. Because once we walk into that room, there's no going back. If you have doubts, if you're not sure you can do this, tell me now, and we'll find another way. Mara met his eyes. There is no other way. You said it yourself. This is survival. I'm not backing out. Even if it means standing in front of 5 of the most dangerous people on the East Coast and defending a marriage you never wanted? I never said I didn't want it, Mara corrected quietly. I said I didn't have a choice. There's a difference. Damien studied her for a long moment. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I cornered you into an impossible situation and you took the only exit available. You gave me an exit, Mara said. Before you showed up, I didn't have one. Carl Finch was going to take this farm, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. You changed that. Maybe it wasn't romance, maybe it wasn't love at first sight, but it was real. And tomorrow night, I'm going to tell them that. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or something deeper. You're braver than you give yourself credit for. I'm terrified, Mara admitted, but I've been terrified for 6 months. At least now I'm terrified with backup. That startled a laugh out of him, short and genuine. Backup, is that what I am? Heavily armed backup, Mara clarified, and smiled despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. The best kind. What they stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, and Mara realized with a jolt that she was getting used to having him here, this strange, complicated man who fixed barn doors and paid off loan sharks and slept on her couch like a ghost trying not to disturb the living. Damien, she said slowly, what happens if we win tomorrow? If the council upholds the marriage and you get your inheritance, what then? Then we have a year to figure out how to live with each other, he said, and at the end of it, you decide if you want to walk away or renegotiate. And if we lose? Then Julian gets everything. Carl Finch comes back, and we both lose the only thing we were trying to protect. He turned to look at her. But we're not going to lose. You sound very certain. I am certain, Damien said. Because I've seen you stand up to Carl Finch with a rifle in your hands and fire in your eyes. If you can do that, you can handle 5 crime lords in suits. Trust me. Mara wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that tomorrow night would go smoothly, that the council would see what Damien saw, that this desperate gamble would somehow work out. But doubt gnawed at her, whispering that she was in over her head, that she was just a farmer playing dress-up in a world she didn't understand. "Hey," Damien said softly, and when she looked up, he was closer than she had realized. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you don't face it alone. I'll be right there beside you. That's a promise." "You keep making me promises," Mara said. "And I keep them," Damien said. "That's the difference between me and Julian. He makes threats. I make promises. And I never break them." The next morning arrived with brutal clarity. Mara woke before dawn, her stomach churning with nerves, and found Damien already awake in the kitchen. He had made coffee again, but this time he was dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her truck, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, transforming him back into the crime lord she sometimes forgot he was. "Big day," she said, pouring herself a cup. "The biggest," Damien agreed. He looked at her carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up." "Don't," he said with the ghost of a smile. "Victoria will kill us both if you ruin that dress before the council meeting." Despite her nerves, Mara laughed. They ate breakfast in silence, toast and eggs neither of them really wanted, and then Victoria arrived to help Mara get ready. The transformation took 2 hours. Victoria worked with brisk efficiency, styling Mara's hair into a sleek twist, applying makeup that was subtle but striking, and finally zipping her into the emerald dress. When it was done, Mara looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and saw someone she barely recognized, poised, elegant, and utterly unlike the exhausted farmer who had pointed a rifle at a stranger 4 days ago. "You look perfect," Victoria said with satisfaction. "Now remember, shoulders back, chin up, and don't apologize for taking up space. You belong in that room just as much as any of them." "I don't feel like I belong." "Fake it," Victoria said bluntly. "Half of power is just convincing people you already have it. The council will be looking for weakness. Don't give them any." At 7:30, they left the farm in a convoy of black SUVs. Mara rode with Damien in the lead vehicle, her hands clasped tight in her lap to keep them from shaking. He reached over and covered them with one of his own. "Breathe," he said quietly. "You've got this. What if I don't? What if I freeze, or say the wrong thing, or—" "Then I'll handle it," Damien said firmly. "But you won't freeze. You're stronger than that." The council met in a private estate outside Richmond, a sprawling mansion that screamed old money and older violence. Armed guards lined the driveway, and Mara counted at least a dozen men positioned around the perimeter as their SUV rolled to a stop in front of the main entrance. "Showtime," Damien murmured, and then they were stepping out into the cool evening air. The entrance hall was all marble and crystal, intimidatingly beautiful. A man in a butler's uniform, though Mara suspected he was more bodyguard than servant, led them through a series of hallways to a set of ornate double doors. "They're waiting for you," he said, and pushed the doors open. The council chamber was exactly as imposing as Mara had feared. 5 people sat at a massive oak table, each flanked by their own security. At the head sat an elderly man with silver hair and eyes like chips of flint, Marcus Castellano, Mara guessed. To his right, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head who could only be Victor Kuryakin. The woman in the elegant suit with ice in her gaze had to be Diane Foster. Beside her sat a younger Asian man, James Chen, who watched them enter with undisguised curiosity. And at the far end, a striking woman in her 40s with red hair and a scar across her collarbone smiled coldly at them, Elizabeth Moretti. And standing to the side, wearing a smile that made Mara's skin crawl, was Julian Cross. "Ah," Julian said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "The happy couple. How touching." Damien's hand found the small of Mara's back, a gesture of support that looked to the room like possession. "We're here as requested. Let's get this over with." Marcus Castellano leaned forward. "Damien Cross, you've asked this council to acknowledge your father's will and confirm your inheritance of his holdings. Is that correct?" "It is," Damien said. "And you've satisfied the marriage requirement by wedding Mrs. Cross, exactly 3 days ago, correct?" "Correct." "I object," Julian said immediately, stepping forward. "This marriage is a fraud." The word hung in the air like a thrown knife, and Mara felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Julian's smile widened as he crossed his arms, radiating the kind of confidence that came from holding cards he knew no one else could match. A fraud, Marcus Castellano repeated, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp. That's a serious accusation, Julian. You have evidence to support this claim? I have common sense, Julian said smoothly. My brother needed a wife within 30 days to satisfy our father's will. He found one in less than 48 hours. Does that sound like a legitimate marriage to any of you, or does it sound like exactly what it is? A desperate transaction designed to cheat me out of my rightful inheritance? Your father's will was very specific, Diane Foster said, her voice cool and precise. It required marriage, not love. Damien has satisfied the letter of the law. The letter, perhaps, Julian conceded. But what about the spirit? Our father wanted Damien to settle down, to build something beyond the empire. He wanted stability, family, a legacy that went beyond violence and control. Instead, Damien bought himself a farm girl and called it a marriage. Mara felt the words like a slap, but Damien's hand pressed more firmly against her back, steadying her. She forced herself to breathe, to stand tall, to remember what Victoria had said. Don't show weakness. I didn't buy her, Damien said, and his voice was cold as winter. I offered her a choice, and she took it. That's more than you've ever given anyone, Julian. A choice? Julian laughed, and it was an ugly sound. You offered her money, protection, and an escape from the debt trap I created specifically to give you no other options. That's not a choice. That's coercion dressed up in a contract. Victor Kuryakin leaned forward, his massive hands folded on the table. The girl is here. Why don't we ask her directly? Mrs. Cross, did your husband coerce you into this marriage? Mara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment Damien had prepared her for. The moment everything hinged on. She could feel Julian watching her, waiting for her to stumble, to confirm everything he had just said. She could feel the council's collective gaze measuring her, judging whether she was worth their acknowledgement or just another pawn in a game between brothers. She stepped forward, away from Damien's protective hand, and met Victor's eyes directly. No, she said, and her voice came out stronger than she felt. He didn't coerce me. He offered me a deal and I took it because it was the best option I had. But I took it freely, with full understanding of what I was agreeing to. The best option, Julian repeated, pouncing on the words. Not what you wanted, not what you chose out of desire or affection. The best option in a bad situation. That's not a marriage, that's a business arrangement. Most marriages in this room started as business arrangements, Elizabeth Moretti said quietly, and Mara saw Julian's jaw tighten. The question isn't whether it began with love. The question is whether it's legitimate enough to satisfy the will's requirements. Exactly, Julian said, recovering quickly. And I argue it's not. A marriage entered into solely to circumvent inheritance law with no intention of building an actual life together is fraud, pure and simple. Then let her speak, James Chen said, studying Mara with open curiosity. Mrs. Cross, you say you understood what you were agreeing to. What exactly did you understand? Mara took a breath, feeling the emerald dress Victoria had chosen suddenly like armor. I understood that Damien needed a wife to claim his inheritance. I understood that I was in debt and desperate and running out of options. I understood that what he was offering was transactional, a year of my life in exchange for protection and freedom from the people trying to destroy me. There, Julian said triumphantly. She admits it's transactional. I'm not finished, Mara said sharply, and the room went quiet. She turned to look at Julian directly, meeting his smug expression with something harder than fear. You want to talk about fraud? Let's talk about how you used Carl Finch to terrorize me for 6 months. Let's talk about how you engineered my debt specifically to put pressure on your brother. Let's talk about how you sent Carl to my farm 2 days ago to threaten me, even after the debt was paid, because you can't stand the idea that Damien outmaneuvered you. Julian's smile faltered. I don't know what you're... Carl told me himself, Mara interrupted. He said you were his insurance policy, that when this marriage fell apart, he would come collect. Those were his exact words. So if we're going to discuss fraud and coercion, maybe we should start with the man who's been manipulating this situation from the beginning. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus Castellano's expression went from neutral to dangerous, and even Diane Foster's ice-cold composure cracked slightly. Is this true, Julian? Marcus asked quietly. Carl Finch is a business associate, Julian said stiffly. What he does on his own time. Don't insult our intelligence, Victor cut in, his voice like gravel. We all know how this works. If Finch was at her farm making threats, he was doing it on your orders. The question is why? Because I wanted to prove what this marriage really is, Julian said, abandoning pretense. Damien needed leverage, so he found the most desperate woman he could and bought her cooperation. That's not a marriage, it's a transaction. And our father's will specifically states that the marriage must be entered into in good faith, with the intention of building a lasting partnership. This farce satisfies neither requirement. You don't know anything about my intentions, Mara said, and she heard her own voice rising with anger she had been holding back for days. You don't know anything about me except what you've decided to believe because it fits your narrative. You want to paint me as some naive farm girl who got manipulated by your brother? Fine. I was naive. I was desperate. I was drowning in debt that you created, living in fear of men you sent, trying to hold on to the only thing my family left me. And yes, when Damien showed up offering a way out, I took it, but that doesn't make me bought. It makes me smart. She took a step toward the table, ignoring the security guards who tensed at her movement. You think I don't understand what this world is? You think I don't know what happens in rooms like this? The deals that get made and broken, the lives that get crushed in the name of power. I'm not stupid, Mr. Cross. I knew exactly what I was agreeing to when I married your brother. And I chose it anyway because unlike you, he was honest with me. He told me the truth, that he needed a wife, that it would be dangerous, that I would be stepping into a world most people run from. And he gave me the choice to say no. Did he? Julian shot back. Or did he just make saying no impossible? Nothing is impossible, Mara said flatly. I could have refused. I could have taken my chances with Carl Finch, lost the farm, started over somewhere else. It would have been hell, but it would have been my choice. Instead, I chose this. I chose to stand beside a man who at least had the decency to treat me like a partner instead of a target. So yes, this marriage started as a transaction, but it's my transaction and I own it. And if that's not good enough for you, then you're not questioning the marriage. You're questioning whether I have the right to make my own decisions. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, could feel the weight of 5 calculating gazes, could feel Damien's presence behind her like a wall she could fall back against if she needed to. But she didn't fall back. She stood her ground and waited. Elizabeth Moretti was the first to break the silence. I like her, she said, almost conversationally. She has spine. Spine doesn't make a marriage legitimate, Julian said, but some of the certainty had bled out of his voice. No, Marcus Castellano agreed, but it's a start. Mrs. Cross, let me ask you something directly. When your year is up and you're free to walk away, what do you think you'll do? It was a trap question, and Mara knew it. If she said she would leave, it proved Julian's point about the marriage being temporary and transactional. If she said she would stay, they would know she was lying, so she told the truth. I don't know, Mara said simply. A year is a long time. A lot can change. Right now, I'm choosing to honor the agreement I made. What I choose when that year is over will depend on what kind of partnership we've built in the meantime. But I'm not making promises I can't keep, and I'm not pretending this is something it's not. It's a marriage that started with necessity and might end with divorce, or it might turn into something real. I genuinely don't know yet, but I know I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to be, and that's the only truth that matters. Diane Foster nodded slowly. Honest, she said to Marcus. I appreciate that. Honesty doesn't satisfy the will's requirements, Julian pressed. Our father wanted Damien to build something lasting, not a year-long experiment that ends in divorce. Your father wanted Damien to take responsibility for something beyond himself, Marcus said, and there was steel in his voice now. He wanted proof that Damien could commit to something difficult and see it through. A marriage that begins with mutual benefit and might evolve into something more. That sounds like exactly the kind of challenge your father would have appreciated. Julian's face was flushing red. You can't seriously be considering— We're considering all the evidence, Victor interrupted, including the fact that you've been manipulating the situation from the shadows, using proxies to terrorize a civilian, and generally behaving like a spoiled child who can't accept that his father chose his brother over him. That's not— It is, Elizabeth said coldly. We all know it, Julian. You've been positioning yourself to challenge Damien from the moment your father died. The only question is whether this council is going to reward that behavior or punish it. James Chen, who had been quiet throughout most of the exchange, finally spoke up. "I want to hear from Damien," he said, "because so far we've heard from everyone except the man who's actually asking for our acknowledgement. Damien, why this woman? Why this marriage? And don't tell me it's just about the deadline. You could have found a dozen women willing to marry you for money. Why her?" Damien stepped forward, and Mara felt him come to stand beside her, a united front. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but absolutely certain. "Because she's the only person I've met in the last 8 weeks who didn't want anything from me except honesty," he said. "Everyone else, every business associate, every family friend, every woman who suddenly found me attractive now that I had an inheritance to claim, they all wanted something. Power, money, access, status. Mara wanted her farm back and her life back, and she was willing to work for it. That's not greed, that's dignity. And when I told her what this marriage would cost, she didn't flinch. She set conditions, demanded respect, and made sure I understood that she wasn't someone who could be bought or intimidated. That's the kind of strength my father would have valued. That's the kind of partner I need if I'm going to do this job right." "Pretty words," Julian sneered, "but they don't change the facts. This marriage is a sham, and everyone in this room knows it." "Then we vote," Marcus said, cutting through Julian's protest with the authority of someone who had run this council for decades. "The question before us is simple. Does Damien Cross's marriage to Mara Whitlock satisfy the requirements of his father's will, or does it constitute fraud that should void the inheritance and transfer everything to Julian Cross?" "I vote to uphold the marriage," Elizabeth Moretti said immediately. "Julian's behavior throughout this entire situation has been manipulative and underhanded. I won't reward that by giving him what he wants." "Agreed," Viktor Kuryakin said. "The marriage may be unconventional, but it's legal and it's honest. That's more than we can say for most arrangements in this room. I vote to uphold it." Diane Foster studied her folded hands for a moment, then looked up. "The will requires marriage entered into in good faith. I believe what I've heard tonight constitutes good faith. Two people entering an agreement with clear terms and honest intentions. I vote to uphold the marriage." 3-0. Mara felt her knees go weak with relief, but the vote wasn't over yet. James Chen was watching Damien with an unreadable expression. "I have one more question," he said. "Damien, what happens if we vote to void the marriage? What do you do then?" "I lose everything," Damien said bluntly. "Julian gets the inheritance, and I walk away with nothing. Mara loses the protection I promised her, and Carl Finch comes back to finish what he started. Everything I've built, everything my father wanted me to protect, it all goes to someone who will burn it down out of spite." "And if we uphold it, what kind of leader will you be?" Damien was quiet for a moment. "The kind my father should have been," he said finally. "Someone who understands that power without responsibility is just tyranny. Someone who knows the difference between strength and cruelty. I'm not perfect, James. I've done things I'm not proud of, hurt people who didn't deserve it, made choices I can't take back, but I'm trying to be better than what I was. And having someone beside me who demands that I be better, that's not a weakness. That's the only thing that's going to keep me from becoming the monster my father sometimes was." James Chen nodded slowly. "I vote to uphold the marriage." 4-0. Marcus Castellano was the last vote, and his expression was grave as he looked from Damien to Julian and back again. "This council has one purpose," Marcus said quietly. "To maintain stability and ensure that power transitions smoothly from one generation to the next. Your father's will was designed to force you to grow up, Damien, to take responsibility for something beyond your own desires. I believe you've done that. The marriage may be unconventional, but it's real enough. And more importantly, Julian's behavior throughout this process has convinced me that he's not ready to lead anything. So I vote to uphold the marriage and acknowledge Damien Cross as his father's legitimate heir." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. "The vote is 5-0, Marcus said. "The marriage stands. Damien Cross is acknowledged as the head of the Cross family and inheritor of all holdings previously controlled by his father. Julian Cross's challenge is denied. This matter is closed." Julian's face went white, then red, then white again. For a moment, Mara thought he would actually attack his brother right there in the council chamber. Instead, he turned on his heel and stalked toward the door, his security team scrambling to follow. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking with rage. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. If you threaten my brother or his wife again, Elizabeth Moretti said pleasantly, I'll take it as a personal insult. And you remember what happened the last time you insulted me, don't you, Julian? Julian slammed out of the chamber without answering, and the doors crashed shut behind him. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of a storm. Mara realized she was shaking, not from fear this time, but from the sheer adrenaline crash of having survived something she hadn't been sure she could. Well, Victor said, standing and stretching, that was more entertaining than I expected. Damien, congratulations on your inheritance, and on your wife. She's got fire. Thank you, Damien said, and Mara heard the genuine relief in his voice. Marcus approached them both, his expression thoughtful. You surprised me tonight, Mrs. Cross. When Julian first made his accusations, I expected you to crumble or deflect. Instead, you went on the offensive. That takes courage. Or stupidity, Mara said, and was surprised to hear herself laugh. In my experience, Marcus said with a faint smile, the line between courage and stupidity is often very thin. But you walked it well. Your husband is lucky to have you. After the council members had filed out, offering their congratulations and thinly veiled warnings about what would be expected of Damien now that he controlled the Empire, Mara and Damien were finally alone in the chamber. You were incredible, Damien said quietly. The way you stood up to Julian, the way you answered their questions. I knew you were strong, but that was something else entirely. I was terrified, Mara admitted. The whole time I kept thinking I was going to say the wrong thing and ruin everything. You didn't. You were perfect. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. Thank you for standing beside me, for defending this marriage even when Julian gave you every reason to walk away. I won't forget it. Mara looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. We're partners, she said. That's what you told me. Partners don't abandon each other when things get hard. No, Damien agreed. They don't. They stood there for a moment in the empty chamber, and Mara felt something shift between them, something that had started as pure transaction but was slowly, inexorably becoming something else. She didn't have a name for it yet. She wasn't sure she wanted to name it. But it was real, and it was theirs. And for the first time since her parents died, she felt like she might actually have a future worth fighting for. Let's go home, she said. Damien smiled, and it was the first time she had seen him smile without shadows lurking behind it. Yeah, let's go home. They left the estate and drove back toward the farm in comfortable silence. Mara leaned her head against the car window, watching the dark Virginia countryside roll past, and tried to process everything that had just happened. She had stood in front of 5 crime lords and defended a marriage she barely understood. She had faced down Julian Cross and lived to tell about it. She had won. But even as relief washed over her, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that Julian's parting words hadn't been empty bluster. This isn't over. He had meant it. And men like Julian Cross didn't accept defeat gracefully. What are you thinking? Damien asked, glancing over at her. That we won the battle, Mara said slowly, but the war isn't over yet. No, Damien agreed. It's not. Julian won't accept this. He'll come after us again, probably sooner rather than later. We need to be ready. How do we prepare for someone who's already proven he'll do anything to win? We get stronger, Damien said. We build alliances. We make sure the council's support isn't just symbolic. And we make this marriage real enough that even Julian can't find a way to break it. Mara turned to look at him. What does that mean? Making it real? It means we live like we meant it, Damien said. We build a life together that's more than just a legal contract. We give the council and everyone else watching something they can point to and say, that's a real marriage, not a fraud. It doesn't have to be romantic, it doesn't have to be love, but it has to be genuine. And if we can't do that, then Julian will find a way to use it against us, Damien said bluntly. The council voted to uphold the marriage tonight, but that doesn't mean they're loyal to us. If we show cracks, if we give them reason to doubt, they'll reconsider. We can't afford that. Mara processed this, feeling the weight of what he was asking. They had spent the last 3 days pretending to be married while maintaining careful distance. Now he was suggesting they actually try to build something real. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something else. Curiosity, maybe, or the faint stirring of possibility. Okay, she said. Then we do it. We build something real. When they reached the farm, it was well past midnight. Mara kicked off the heels Victoria had forced her into and stood barefoot in her kitchen, still wearing the emerald dress, feeling utterly exhausted and strangely exhilarated at the same time. I need to make some calls, Damien said, pulling out his phone. Let the right people know how the vote went before Julian starts spreading his version of events. I'm going to change, Mara said, and possibly sleep for a week. You earned it. She was halfway to her bedroom when she heard the sound, a car engine moving fast up the dirt road. Damien heard it too, his hand going immediately to the gun beneath his jacket. Stay inside, he ordered, moving toward the door. But Mara was already reaching for her father's rifle, muscle memory taking over. She had defended this farm before Damien arrived, and she wasn't about to stop now. The car that screeched to a halt in front of the house wasn't one of Damien's SUVs. It was a nondescript sedan, and when the door opened, Carl Finch stumbled out, his face bloody and his expensive jacket torn. Cross, he shouted, his voice ragged. Cross, you need to get her out of here. He's coming. Julian's coming, and he's got... The gunshot cut him off mid-sentence. Carl dropped to the ground, and Mara saw the blood spreading across the dirt. Behind him, emerging from the darkness, were 3 more vehicles and at least a dozen armed men. And at the front, wearing a smile that promised violence, was Julian Cross. Hello, brother, Julian called out. I think it's time we had a real conversation about what you took from me. Damien's response was instant and absolute. He shoved Mara behind him with one hand while raising his gun with the other, his body becoming a wall between her and the armed men spreading across her front yard like a plague. Get inside, he said, his voice low and deadly calm. Lock the doors. Call Victoria and tell her to get the security team here now. I'm not leaving you out here alone, Mara said, raising the rifle. You're not, Damien said, but I need you safe, and I need backup. Please, Mara, trust me. The please did it. She had never heard him beg for anything, and the desperation beneath the word told her this was worse than it looked. She backed toward the house, keeping the rifle trained on Julian's men, and only when she was inside did she lower it long enough to grab her phone. Her hands shook as she dialed Victoria's number. It rang twice before the lawyer's crisp voice answered. What's wrong? Julian's here, Mara said, her words tumbling out. At the farm. He has men with guns, and he just shot Carl Finch, and Damien's out there alone. I'm sending the team now, Victoria interrupted. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone except Damien or someone you recognize. I'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes might be too late. Then make sure you're still alive when I arrive, Victoria said sharply. And Mara? Don't try to be a hero. Let Damien handle this. The line went dead. Mara moved to the window, staying low, and watched the nightmare unfold in her front yard. Julian was walking toward Damien now, his hands spread in a gesture of false peace, while his men fanned out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. Carl Finch's body lay motionless in the dirt, a dark stain spreading beneath him. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Julian, Damien said, and his voice carried across the yard with eerie calm. Shooting an unarmed man to make a point? That's low even for you. Carl was a liability, Julian said dismissively. He came here to warn you, to betray me after everything I gave him. I don't tolerate betrayal, brother. You should know that by now. What do you want? Julian's smile widened. What do I want? I want what's mine. The inheritance, the empire, the respect that should have been mine from the beginning. Our father was a fool to choose you over me, and tonight's little council meeting doesn't change that. The council voted, Damien said. 5-0. It's over, Julian. You lost. I lost? Julian laughed, and it was a terrible sound. No, brother, I lost a battle. But the war? That's just beginning. See, the council might have voted to uphold your farce of a marriage, but they can't protect you if you're dead. And they certainly can't protect that pretty little farm wife you bought yourself. Damien's gun came up, steady and sure. You're not touching her. Am I not? Julian gestured, and 2 of his men peeled off from the group, moving toward the house. Let's test that theory. I wonder how long you'll keep playing the devoted husband when I put a gun to her head and make you choose, her life or your empire. Mara's blood turned to ice. She could see the men approaching, could see Damien's finger tightening on the trigger, could feel the weight of the rifle in her own hands. She had 3 seconds to make a decision, She could stay inside and hope Damien's security team arrived in time. She could hide and pray Julian's men didn't find her. Or she could do what her father had taught her, stand her ground and fight for what was hers. She chose the third option. The farmhouse door swung open, and Mara stepped onto the porch with the rifle raised to her shoulder, the stock pressed against her cheek the way her father had shown her 1,000 times. The two men approaching the house froze, startled by the sudden appearance of an armed woman in an evening gown. "That's close enough," Mara said, and her voice didn't shake. "This is my property, and you're trespassing. Leave now, or I will shoot you." Julian actually clapped, slow and mocking. "Well, well, the farm girl has teeth after all. I'm impressed, Damien. She might actually be worth what you paid for her." "Last warning, Julian," Damien said, and there was murder in his voice. "Take your men and go, or this ends badly for everyone." "Oh, it's already going to end badly," Julian said. "The only question is whether your wife dies fast or slow. See, I brought enough men to take this farm and everyone in it. You might be fast, brother, but you're not faster than 12 guns, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down your weapon, tell your little bride to do the same, and then we're all going to have a nice conversation about how you're going to sign over everything our father left you. And if you refuse, I'm going to start shooting people you care about until you change your mind." "You're insane," Mara said from the porch. "The council will never let you get away with this." "The council doesn't need to know," Julian said, turning his smile on her. "Tragic accident, really. Damien Cross and his new wife killed by robbers on their isolated farm. Such a shame. But these things happen in the countryside. And once I'm in control, I'll make sure the investigation goes exactly nowhere." Damien's expression went absolutely cold. "You kill her, and I will hunt you through every hole you try to hide in. There won't be a place on earth safe enough. That's not a threat. It's a promise." "Promises, promises," Julian said. "You always were sentimental. It's going to get you killed." He raised his hand, and Mara saw his men start to move, weapons coming up, fingers on triggers. Then the world exploded into chaos. The first shot came from the trees to the left, a sniper Mara hadn't seen, taking out one of Julian's men with brutal efficiency. The second and third shots came from the barn, where Damien's security team had apparently been hiding, waiting for exactly this moment. Julian's careful ambush collapsed into a firefight, men diving for cover as bullets tore through the night air. Damien moved like lightning, grabbing Julian and slamming him against the nearest vehicle hard enough to dent the metal. "You came to my home," he snarled, "threatened my wife, shot an unarmed man in my yard. Give me one reason I shouldn't kill you right now." "Because I'm your brother," Julian gasped, and there was real fear in his eyes now. "Because killing me will make you exactly what our father was, a monster who solves every problem with violence." For a terrible moment, Mara thought Damien would do it. She could see the rage in his face, the way his finger tightened on the trigger, the absolute certainty that Julian deserved to die for what he had tried to do. But then something shifted in his expression, and he stepped back, keeping the gun trained on Julian but not firing. "You're right," Damien said quietly. "Killing you would make me what he was. So I'm going to do something he never would have done. I'm going to show you mercy. But that mercy comes with conditions." Around them, the firefight was ending. Damien's security team had superior position and better training, and Julian's men were either down, surrendering, or running for their vehicles. Within 2 minutes, it was over. Victoria arrived with the full security detail just as the last of Julian's people were being zip-tied and lined up against the barn. "You have remarkably good timing," Damien said as Victoria stepped out of her car, looking utterly unruffled despite the carnage. "I called ahead," Victoria said crisply. "Told your team to be in position before I even left the estate. I assumed Julian would do something stupid tonight. I just didn't think he'd be this stupid." She looked at Julian, still pinned against the vehicle, and her expression went arctic. "Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, criminal conspiracy, and threatening a council-acknowledged leader. Julian, you've outdone yourself." "The council will never side with him over me," Julian spat. "I'm family." "The council will side with whoever maintains order," Victoria said. "And what you just did? That's the opposite of order. That's chaos. And the one thing the council hates more than anything else is chaos." Damien's phone rang. He answered it without taking his eyes off Julian, listened for a moment, then handed it to his brother. "It's Marcus Castellano. He wants to talk to you." Julian's face went white as he took the phone. Mara couldn't hear what was being said, but she watched the color drain from Julian's face. watched his hands start to shake, watched the arrogance crumble into something that looked a lot like terror. "Yes, sir," Julian said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I understand." "Yes. Yes, I understand." He handed the phone back to Damien, and for the first time since Mara had met him, Julian Cross looked broken. "What did he say?" Damien asked. "That I have 24 hours to leave the state," Julian said dully. "That if I'm still in Virginia after that, the council will consider me a rogue element and deal with me accordingly. That I'm stripped of all family assets, all business interests, all connections. That I'm exiled, effective immediately. Could have been worse," Damien said. "I could have let my security team kill you." "This is worse than death," Julian said bitterly. "You've taken everything." "No," Damien corrected. "You threw everything away the moment you came here with murder on your mind. I gave you an out, Julian. After the council meeting, you could have walked away, rebuilt somewhere else, made a life that didn't involve trying to destroy me. But you couldn't do it. You couldn't let go of the hate long enough to see that our father's empire isn't worth this." "It's all I have," Julian said, and for a moment he sounded almost human. "He chose you. He always chose you. I was never good enough, never smart enough, never enough of whatever he wanted me to be. And now you're taking even the possibility of proving him wrong." Something flickered across Damien's face. Not quite pity, but something close. "Our father was wrong about a lot of things," he said quietly. "But he was right about one thing. You can't build anything real when you're consumed by hate. I'm sorry he made you feel like you weren't enough, but that doesn't give you the right to destroy everyone else." He gestured to his security team. "Get him out of here. Make sure he's on a plane out of state by morning. And if he comes back, if he tries anything at all, you have my permission to handle it permanently." They took Julian away, still protesting, still promising revenge. Mara watched from the porch as the vehicles disappeared into the night, carrying away the man who had tried to destroy everything she and Damien had built in the last 4 days. When the yard was finally clear except for Victoria and the security team securing the perimeter, Mara set down her rifle with shaking hands and sank onto the porch steps. The adrenaline was draining out of her, leaving behind exhaustion so profound she could barely keep her eyes open. Damien climbed the steps and sat beside her, and they were quiet for a long moment, watching the security team work. "Is Carl alive?" Mara asked finally. "Barely," Damien said. "Victoria's people are taking him to a hospital. Whether he makes it or not, I don't know. Julian shot him just to prove a point." "Julian shot him because Carl was trying to do the right thing," Damien said. "Trying to warn us. That's what happens in my world when people try to be decent. They get punished for it." Mara looked at him, this man she had married 4 days ago, who had just shown mercy to a brother who would have killed them both. "You could have killed him. Everyone would have understood." "I know," Damien said, "but you were right there, watching, and I didn't want you to see me become what I'm trying not to be anymore. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," Mara said softly. "It does." They sat there as the night deepened around them, and Mara realized with a jolt that something fundamental had shifted between them. This wasn't a transaction anymore. This wasn't two strangers playing at marriage to satisfy a legal requirement. This was partnership, forged in fire and sealed with trust. They had stood together against Julian's attack, had defended each other without hesitation, had chosen mercy over revenge because they both understood that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. "We should go inside," Damien said eventually. "It's late, and you've had one hell of a night." "So have you." "Yeah, but I'm used to it." He stood and offered her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and they walked into the house together. Victoria appeared in the doorway as they entered, her expression concerned. "Carl Finch is stable," she said. "The doctors think he'll survive, though it's going to be a long recovery. And I've confirmed with Marcus Castellano that Julian is being escorted to the airport as we speak. He'll be in California by morning, and the council has made it very clear that he's not welcome to return." "Good," Damien said. "Thank you, Victoria, for everything." "That's what you pay me for," Victoria said, but her expression softened slightly. "Get some sleep, both of you. Tomorrow we'll deal with the cleanup and the questions. Tonight, you've earned rest." After she left, Mara stood in her kitchen, this kitchen where she had signed a marriage contract 4 days ago, where she had learned to live with a stranger, where she had just survived an attempted murder, and felt the weight of everything finally catch up to her. I need to get out of this dress, she said, looking down at the emerald fabric that was now stained with dirt and fear. I can't. Hey, Damien said gently, stepping closer. It's okay. You're safe now. You're allowed to fall apart. I can't fall apart, Mara said, but her voice was shaking. If I start, I won't be able to stop, and there's still so much to... There's nothing that can't wait until morning, Damien interrupted. Go change, take a shower, I'll make sure the security team has the perimeter locked down, and then I'll be right here if you need me, okay? Mara nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and fled to her bedroom. She peeled off the dress with shaking hands, left it in a heap on the floor, and stood under the shower until the hot water ran cold. When she finally emerged, wrapped in an old robe, she found Damien sitting on the couch, his gun disassembled on the coffee table as he cleaned it with methodical precision. I thought you'd be asleep, she said. Can't sleep yet, Damien admitted. Too much adrenaline. Plus, I wanted to make sure you were okay. Mara sat down in the armchair across from him, pulling her knees up to her chest. I pointed a rifle at armed men tonight. I was ready to shoot them. I know, I saw. I've never shot anyone. I've hunted. I know how to use a gun, but actually aiming at a person, that's different. It is, Damien agreed, and I'm sorry you had to face that choice. You shouldn't have had to. But I did, Mara said, because I married you, because I'm part of this world now, whether I like it or not. Damien set down the gun parts and looked at her directly. If you want out, I'll understand. After tonight, after everything Julian put you through, if you want to walk away, I'll make sure the council honors the divorce. You'll keep the farm, keep the money, and I'll make sure you're protected even after we're not married anymore. You don't owe me anything. Mara stared at him. You're giving me an out? Now? After we just won? I'm giving you a choice, Damien corrected. You've been reacting to crisis after crisis since the moment I showed up. You haven't had time to actually think about whether this is what you want. So I'm giving you that time now. Think about it. Really think about it. And if you decide this isn't the life you want, I won't hold it against you. She should have felt relieved. She should have felt grateful for the escape hatch he was offering. Instead, she felt something else entirely, a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. You think I don't know my own mind? She said. You think I didn't make a choice every single day for the last 4 days? I chose to sign that contract. I chose to stand beside you at the council meeting. I chose to defend this marriage in front of 5 crime lords. And tonight, I chose to walk out onto that porch with a rifle instead of hiding. Those were my choices, Damien, mine. And I'm not taking them back just because things got hard. I'm not saying, yes, you are, Mara interrupted. You're saying I'm too delicate to handle your world, too naive to understand what I'm getting into. But I'm not delicate, and I'm not naive anymore. I know exactly what this life is now. I know it's dangerous and violent and nothing like what I planned. But it's also mine. This farm, this marriage, this partnership, it's mine, and I'm not giving it up. Damien was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're sure? I'm sure, Mara said firmly. We made a deal. 1 year, and I intend to honor it, not because I have to, but because I want to see what we can build together. Is that clear enough for you? For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then he stood, crossed the distance between them, and knelt in front of her chair so they were eye to eye. Mara Whitlock, he said quietly, you are the strongest person I've ever met. And I'm sorry if I made you feel like I doubted that. I don't. I'm trying to give you choices I never had. That's all. Something in Mara's chest loosened. I know, she said, and I appreciate it, but the choice I'm making is to stay. So stop trying to give me exits and start figuring out how we're going to make this actually work. Damien smiled, and it was real and warm and completely unlike the cold masks he wore for everyone else. Okay, he said, then we make it work. Starting with the fact that I'm not sleeping on the couch anymore. Mara raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Not like that, Damien said quickly, standing up. I just mean, this house has a guest room, right? The one you've been using for storage? I'm going to clean it out, set it up properly. If we're really doing this, if we're building something real, then I need to stop acting like I'm camping in your living room and start actually living here. With you. Oh, Mara said, feeling oddly flustered. Yeah, that makes sense. And tomorrow, Damien continued, We're going to sit down and actually talk about what the next year looks like. Not just the legal requirements or the council's expectations, but what we want. What kind of partnership this is going to be. Because you're right, we're in this together, and that means we need to be honest with each other about what we're building. Mara nodded, feeling the exhaustion finally starting to pull her under. Tomorrow, she agreed. Right now, I need to sleep for about 12 hours. Then sleep, Damien said. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. I'll sleep when the security team confirms Julian is actually on that plane, Damien said. Go to bed, Mara. I've got this. She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Instead, she stood, gave him one last look that she hoped conveyed everything she couldn't put into words, and retreated to her bedroom. She fell asleep still wearing her robe, curled up on top of the covers, and dreamed of gunfire and council meetings and a man with a scarred face who had chosen mercy when violence would have been easier. When she woke, sun was streaming through her window and the smell of coffee was drifting through the house. She stumbled out of bed, pulled on actual clothes, and found Damien in the kitchen, looking haggard but satisfied. Julian's in California, he said without preamble. Marcus called to confirm. He's being watched, and if he makes any move toward the East Coast, we'll know about it immediately. Good, Mara said, pouring herself coffee. What about Carl? Still in ICU, but stable. Victoria's handling the situation, making sure he understands that his best option is to disappear quietly and never speak of what happened. Damien took a sip of his own coffee. And the council has officially ratified my position. As of this morning, I'm the acknowledged head of the Cross family empire. Congratulations, Mara said, and meant it. Couldn't have done it without you. He set down his cup and looked at her seriously. I mean that, Mara. You saved this. If you hadn't stood up to Julian, if you hadn't convinced the council that this marriage was real, none of this would have worked. We saved it, Mara corrected. Together. That's what partners do. Partners, Damien echoed, and smiled. I'm still getting used to that word. You better get used to it fast, Mara said, because we have 11 months and change left on this contract, and I intend to make the most of them. Is that so? That's so, Mara confirmed, starting with you teaching me how to shoot properly, not just hunting, but actual defensive shooting. If I'm going to live in your world, I need to be able to protect myself. Damien's eyebrows rose. You're serious? Completely. You saw what happened last night. I froze on that porch because I know how to hunt deer, not how to face down armed men. I don't want to freeze again. Teach me. All right, Damien said slowly. I can do that. What else? I want to know about the business, Mara said. The legitimate parts and the not-so-legitimate parts. If we're partners, I need to understand what I'm partnering in. No more secrets. That's a lot to take in. I can handle it, Mara said firmly, and I want to help. I'm not just going to be the wife who stays home while you run an empire. I want to be useful. Damien studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, then we start today. But fair warning, some of what you're going to learn isn't pretty. I watched your brother shoot a man in my front yard last night, Mara said dryly. I think I can handle not pretty. For the rest of the morning, they worked side by side, clearing out the guest room, transforming it from a storage space into something that actually looked habitable. Damien's men brought over furniture, and by early afternoon, the room was set up with a proper bed, a dresser, and enough space that Damien could actually unpack the bags he had been living out of for 4 days. Feels more permanent, Mara observed, standing in the doorway and surveying their work. It is more permanent, Damien said. For the next year, at least. He looked at her. And maybe longer, if we decide that's what we want when the time comes. Maybe, Mara agreed and felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. The months that followed Julian's exile unfolded with a rhythm Mara hadn't expected, slow and steady, like the changing of seasons on the farm she had fought so hard to keep. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it new growth and the kind of cautious hope that comes from surviving something you weren't sure you would. Damien kept his promise about teaching her to shoot. They started the very next week, setting up targets in the back field where her father used to test his hunting rifles. But this wasn't hunting. This was survival training, combat shooting, the kind of skills that came from a life Mara was still learning to navigate. Don't anticipate the recoil, Damien said, standing behind her as she lined up her shot. Let it happen. Your body knows what to do. You just have to trust it. She fired, and the target's center mass took the hit. Not perfect, but better than yesterday. Good, Damien said, and she heard the approval in his voice. Again. They fell into patterns. Morning coffee that Damien still made without being asked. Afternoons where Mara worked the farm while Damien handled business calls from the porch, his world of crime and commerce bleeding into her world of soil and sunlight. Evenings where they sat at the kitchen table and he taught her about money laundering and port operations and the delicate balance of power that kept 5 families from tearing each other apart. The Castellanos are traditional, Damien explained one night, spreading papers across the table. They respect hierarchy, loyalty, old-world values. If we want their continued support, we need to show them we're building something that honors those values. And the others? Mara asked, studying the organizational charts he had drawn. Victor wants efficiency and profit. Diane wants innovation and growth. James wants opportunity for advancement. Elizabeth wants respect and autonomy. He looked up at her. What they all want, ultimately, is stability. They want to know that the empire won't collapse into chaos the way it would have under Julian. So we give them stability, Mara said. We do, Damien agreed. But more than that, we give them something better than what my father built. Something that doesn't rely purely on violence and fear. It was a conversation they had been having in pieces for weeks now. The question of what kind of leader Damien wanted to be, what kind of empire he wanted to build. He was trying to move the family's operations legitimate, slowly shifting resources from the illegal enterprises toward businesses that wouldn't get them all arrested or killed. It was dangerous work, threading the needle between honoring his father's legacy and creating something new. Mara found herself becoming part of that transformation in ways she hadn't anticipated. She started attending meetings with Damien, sitting quietly at first, just observing. But the crime lords who had once viewed her as a liability began to see her differently. She asked good questions, she understood financial statements, and more importantly, she wasn't afraid to speak up when she thought Damien was making a mistake. You're becoming a real partner, Victoria observed one afternoon, reviewing contracts in Mara's kitchen. I thought that was just rhetoric for the council. I didn't realize you actually meant it. Neither did I, Mara admitted. But it turns out I'm good at this. The business side, at least. I understand risk management, resource allocation, long-term planning. It's not that different from running a farm, just on a bigger scale with higher stakes. And the other side? Victoria asked carefully. The violence, the moral ambiguity, the fact that even the legitimate businesses are being built on a foundation of crime? Mara was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question she had been asking herself for months. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't bother me, she said finally. But I also understand that change doesn't happen overnight. Damien's trying to build something better, and that's worth supporting, even if the path there isn't clean. 3 months after the council meeting, Carl Finch was released from the hospital. He disappeared immediately, and Mara heard through Victoria that he had relocated to Arizona under an assumed name, starting over somewhere far from Julian's reach and Damien's influence. She felt an unexpected surge of relief at that news. Carl had been a monster in her life for 6 months, but in the end, he had tried to do the right thing. That deserved acknowledgement, even if forgiveness was still beyond her reach. Julian remained in California, and the reports that filtered back through the council's intelligence network painted a picture of a broken man struggling to rebuild. He had tried twice to make contact with Damien, messages that were intercepted and reported but never delivered. The third time, Marcus Castellano himself made the call. Your brother is asking for a meeting, Marcus said when Damien put him on speaker so Mara could hear. He claims he wants to apologize, to make amends. What do you want me to tell him? Damien looked at Mara, and she saw the question in his eyes. This was her choice too now. Their choices were shared in ways that went beyond the legal contract they had signed. What do you think? He asked her. Mara considered it. Julian had tried to kill them both. He had terrorized her, threatened everything she loved, and proven himself to be exactly the kind of man who would burn the world down rather than admit he was wrong. But he was also Damien's brother, and she had learned enough about family in the last few months to know that those bonds didn't break easily, even when they should. I think, she said slowly, that forgiveness is different from reconciliation. You can forgive him for being broken without giving him access to hurt you again. But that's your decision to make, not mine. Damien was quiet for a long moment, then spoke into the phone. Tell Julian I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not ready for a meeting, maybe in a year, maybe never. But right now, the best thing he can do for both of us is stay where he is and build a life that doesn't revolve around what he thinks I took from him. I'll relay the message, Marcus said. And Damien? You made the right choice. Your father would have met with Julian just to prove he could extend mercy, and Julian would have used that meeting to try something stupid. You're smarter than your father was. That's going to serve you well. As spring turned to summer, the farm transformed under Mara's careful attention. With the debt gone and actual resources to work with, she was able to repair the fences, restore the orchards, and bring in the kind of equipment that made the work manageable instead of backbreaking. Damien helped when he could, and Mara discovered that he was surprisingly good with his hands, fixing machinery, mending structures, working the land in ways that suggested he hadn't always lived in suits and boardrooms. My father made me work the docks when I was young, he explained one afternoon, wrestling a rusted tractor part back into alignment. Said I needed to understand what real work felt like before he'd let me anywhere near the business side. I hated it then, but I'm grateful for it now. Why? Mara asked, handing him the wrench he needed. Because it taught me that there's dignity in physical labor, Damien said, that the people doing the hard work deserve respect, not just orders. It's a lesson Julian never learned, and it's part of why the council chose me over him. By the time summer arrived in full force, they had fallen into something that looked remarkably like a real marriage. They had dinner together most nights, sharing stories about their days. They worked side by side on projects, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses. And slowly, carefully, they began to trust each other with the parts of themselves they kept hidden from everyone else. Mara told him about her parents, not just the facts he already knew, but the texture of them. Her mother's laugh, her father's quiet strength, the way they had built a life together through hard work and stubborn determination. She told him about the loneliness of the months after they died, the way the farm had felt like a tomb instead of a home, the mornings when she woke up and forgot for just a moment that they were gone. Damien told her about his father, the brilliance and the brutality, the way he had built an empire through sheer force of will and ruthless pragmatism. He told her about growing up in that shadow, never quite sure if his father loved him or just saw him as a useful tool. He told her about the day his father died, and the relief that had come with the grief, the terrible freedom of knowing he could finally try to be something different. I spent my whole life trying to earn his approval, Damien said one night, sitting on the porch as fireflies danced in the fields. And the day he died, I realized I'd never gotten it, not really. He saw potential in me, but he also saw weakness. The fact that I questioned things, that I wanted to find better ways than just violence and intimidation, he thought that made me soft. You're not soft, Mara said. You're just not him. And that's not weakness, that's evolution. Damien looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You see me differently than anyone else ever has, he said quietly. Even my father, even the council, they all see the empire, the power, the legacy. You see the person underneath. And I don't know if I've ever thanked you for that. You don't have to thank me, Mara said. That's what partners do. They see each other. The conversation hung between them, weighted with things neither of them was quite ready to say out loud. They had 6 months left on their contract, 6 months before they had to decide whether to continue this partnership or walk away with their agreed-upon terms satisfied. And Mara was increasingly certain that she didn't want to walk away. She just wasn't sure if Damien felt the same. In late July, Elizabeth Moretti invited them to a charity gala in Richmond, one of those glittering affairs where the criminal elite rubbed shoulders with legitimate high society, and everyone pretended not to know exactly who funded whose campaigns. Mara spent a week being nervous about it, but when the night arrived, she found herself oddly calm. She had faced down Julian Cross in front of the council. She could handle a party. Damien saw her in the dress Victoria had chosen, midnight blue this time, elegant and understated, and went very still. You look beautiful, he said, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Thank you, Mara said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. You clean up pretty well yourself. At the gala, they moved through the crowd as a unit, and Mara realized that the performance had become real. She didn't have to pretend to be comfortable at Damien's side. She was comfortable. She didn't have to fake the easy communication between them. It existed. And when other people looked at them, They saw what Mara was only just beginning to acknowledge, a couple who had started as strangers and become something far more complicated. "They're betting on how long you'll last," Elizabeth murmured when Mara found herself alone with the red-haired crime lord at the bar. "The cynics give it another 3 months before one of you files for divorce. The romantics think you're in it for the long haul." "What do you think?" Mara asked. Elizabeth smiled, sharp and knowing. "I think you walked into a room full of killers and called them on their bullshit, then went home and built a life with a man most people are terrified of. I think you're exactly where you want to be, even if you haven't admitted it to yourself yet." "And Damien?" "Damien looks at you like you're the only real thing in his life," Elizabeth said bluntly. "So the question isn't whether you're going to last. The question is whether you're both brave enough to admit that this stopped being an arrangement months ago." That night, driving home under a sky full of stars, Mara kept replaying Elizabeth's words. She glanced at Damien, his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights, and felt something shift in her chest. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always." "Are you happy?" The question came out more vulnerable than she intended. "With this life we've built, with the farm and the business and the partnership. Are you happy?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the wheel. "I'm happier than I've ever been," he said finally. "Which is strange, considering I'm working harder than I ever did when my father was alive, dealing with more stress, trying to transform an empire while keeping everyone happy. But yes, I'm happy." He glanced at her. "Are you?" Mara thought about the question. She thought about the terror of the first night Damien appeared at her gate, and the exhaustion of the months before when she was drowning in debt. She thought about the council meeting and Julian's attack and all the moments when she wasn't sure she would survive what she had agreed to. And then she thought about the morning coffee and the shooting lessons and the quiet evenings on the porch. She thought about the way Damien had kept every promise he made, had treated her like an equal when he could have treated her like property, had chosen mercy over violence because he was trying to be better than what he was raised to be. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm happy too." August brought a different kind of crisis. Not violence or threats, but the slow realization that their one-year deadline was approaching faster than either of them wanted to acknowledge. Victoria brought it up first, appearing at the farm with a folder full of legal documents. "We need to discuss the contract," she said without preamble. "You have 3 months until the year is up. If you're planning to divorce, we need to start preparing the paperwork now. If you're planning to renegotiate or continue the marriage, we need to formalize that as well. The council will want clarity." Mara and Damien exchanged glances across the kitchen table. They hadn't talked about it, had been carefully avoiding the subject, both of them afraid to be the first one to bring it up. "What are our options?" Damien asked. Victoria laid out 3 scenarios. Divorce with the originally agreed-upon terms. Mara kept the farm and received the financial settlement they had negotiated, walking away clean. Renegotiation of the contract for another year or more, with updated terms. Or conversion to a real marriage with no end date, which would require new legal arrangements and clear communication with the council about their intentions. "I need to think about it," Mara said, feeling overwhelmed. "We both do," Damien agreed. "Take your time," Victoria said. "But not too much time. 3 months sounds like a lot, but in legal terms, it's barely enough to get everything properly arranged." After Victoria left, Mara and Damien sat in uncomfortable silence, neither sure how to start the conversation they both knew needed to happen. "I don't want to pressure you," Damien said finally, "but I think we need to be honest with each other about what we want. Really want, not just what we think the other person wants to hear." "Okay," Mara said, her heart hammering. "Honesty. You first." Damien took a breath. "I don't want this to end," he said. "I know that's not what we agreed to, and I know you have every right to take the divorce and the settlement and build a life that doesn't involve crime families and council meetings and everything that comes with being married to me. But the truth is, I don't want you to go. I want to keep building this partnership. I want to see where it goes. And I want that because somewhere in the last 9 months, this stopped being about the contract and started being about you." Mara felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I don't want it to end either," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I would. I thought when the year was up, I'd be ready to walk away and reclaim my simple life. But this life, with you, it's not simple, but it's mine, and I don't want to give it up." "So what do we do?" Damien asked. "We make it real," Mara said. Not just legally real, but actually real. No more contracts, no more deadlines, no more pretending this is just a business arrangement. We're married, we're partners, and we figure out what that means as we go. Damien's face transformed with something that looked like relief and joy and disbelief all at once. Are you sure? Because once we make that choice, there's no easy exit. This becomes permanent. Nothing's permanent, Mara corrected gently. But I want to choose you anyway, every day, for as long as it works for both of us. Is that enough? That's everything, Damien said. They called Victoria that night and told her to prepare new legal documents, not for divorce or renegotiation, but for a real marriage with all the protections and commitments that implied. The lawyer's response was characteristically dry. About damn time, she said. I've been watching you two dance around each other for months. I'll have the papers ready by the end of the week. 2 weeks later, they stood in the same orchard where Mara's parents had been married 30 years ago, surrounded by apple blossoms and the quiet witnesses of the security team that had become like family. There was no counsel this time, no performance, no pressure. Just the two of them and a local officiant who didn't care about crime families or empires, just about two people who had found each other in impossible circumstances and decided to stay. I didn't prepare vows, Mara admitted as they stood facing each other in the dappled sunlight. Neither did I, Damien said. But I think we've been saying them all along. Every morning when we choose each other again, that's the vow that matters. Then I choose you, Mara said simply. Today and tomorrow and all the days after that. For as long as you want me. Forever then, Damien said, and kissed her like he meant it. The year that followed was not without challenges. The council continued to demand Damien's attention, and there were always threats lurking at the edges of the empire. But they faced them together, and gradually the family's operation shifted from the shadows into the light. Damien began divesting from the illegal enterprises, investing instead in legitimate businesses, shipping companies, real estate development, technology ventures. It was slow work, and not everyone in the organization was happy about it, but Damien held firm. This was the future he wanted to build, and Mara supported him every step of the way. 2 years after that first desperate night when Damien had appeared at her gate, they stood together at the dedication ceremony for the Whitlock Foundation, a nonprofit organization designed to help family farms in crisis, providing debt relief and financial counseling and support to prevent the kind of predatory lending that had nearly destroyed Mara's life. It was funded by the profits from Damien's legitimate businesses, and it was everything Mara's parents would have wanted their legacy to be. They would have been proud of you, Damien said quietly as they watched the ribbon being cut. They would have been proud of both of us, Mara corrected, for taking something terrible and turning it into something that helps people. That night, as they sat on the porch of the farmhouse where this impossible love story had begun, Damien took her hand and pulled her close. I have something to tell you, he said. Mara tensed, old instincts warning her that nothing good ever started with those words. What is it? I'm going to propose to you again, Damien said. Properly this time, not out of desperation, but out of choice. And I want to do it here, where it all started, in front of the people who mattered most to you. He stood and walked to the edge of the porch, then turned back to face her. Mara Whitlock Cross, we've been married for 2 years now. But those first 12 months were built on contracts and necessity, and even though we made it real, part of me has always felt like I owe you a better beginning. So I'm asking you now, with no pressure and no deadline and no empire hanging in the balance, will you marry me again? Will you choose this life, this partnership, this future we're building together? Mara felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Yes, she said. Always yes. They married for the third time on a crisp October morning, 3 years to the day after Damien had first appeared at her gate with an impossible offer. This time, the wedding was bigger. Friends and allies, the council members who had become unexpected supporters, and Victoria who stood as Mara's witness and tried very hard not to cry. But the moment Mara treasured most came before the ceremony, when she and Damien walked up the hill to her parents' grave and stood there, hand in hand. I wish they could have met you, Mara said softly. I wish they could have seen how you helped me save what they built. I wish I could have asked their permission, Damien said, the right way, the honorable way. But I think I hope they would have approved, not of what I was when we met, but of what I'm trying to become. Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. They would have loved you, she said with certainty, because you love their daughter, and you fight for what matters, and you're building something good from something broken. That's all they ever wanted for me. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Mara and Damien would exchange glances and smile. The truth was too complicated for young ears, too full of debt and desperation and danger. So they would tell a simpler version, that they met when Mara's life was falling apart, and Damien offered her a chance to start over, that they had agreed to help each other, and somewhere along the way, they had fallen in love. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough. Because the real story, the story of two wounded people who had chosen each other in the darkest moment, who had built trust from transaction and turned a desperate gamble into a genuine partnership, that story was theirs alone. It lived in the morning coffee that Damien still made without being asked, in the shooting lessons that had become their meditation, in the farm that thrived under their combined care, and in the foundation that turned their pain into purpose. It lived in every choice they made to stay, to fight, to build something clean and good from the wreckage of their separate pasts. And it lived in the small farmhouse on the Virginia hillside, where laughter had returned and love had taken root, proof that even in the darkest circumstances, two people could find each other and create something beautiful. The debt had brought them together. But it was the choosing, the daily, deliberate choosing of each other, that made them last. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered.